Press that button.
All right, there we go. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting for Monday, October 23rd, 2017. My name is Mark Farrell. I'll be chairing this committee. We are joined by our committee vice chair, Supervisor Aaron Peskin, as well as Supervisor Katie Tang. Want to thank Jim Smith and Samuel Williams for covering this meeting from SF Gov TV, as well as Erica Major, the clerk of our committee. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements today?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the October 31st Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Okay, thank you very much. So colleagues, for different scheduling reasons, we're going to be taking items very much out of order today. So we're going to first hear the Pier 70 items 1 through 3 together. Then we're going to go to item 6, followed by item 5, and then finally item 4, which is the Central SOMA hearing. So with that, Madam Clerk, what do we call items number 1 through 3, please?
Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the general plan to revise maps 4 and 5 of the urban design element to refer to the Pier 70 mixed-use project special use district and affirming appropriate findings. Item number 2 is an ordinance amending the planning code and the zoning map to add Pier 70 special use district and making appropriate findings. Item number 3 is a resolution approving the compromise title settlement and land exchange agreement for Pier 70 between the city and the California State Lands Commission.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. So, colleagues, we had this last week here at committee. These items are sponsored by Supervisor Cohen as well as the mayor. And as soon as she catches her breath, I would like to turn this over to Supervisor Cohen.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, colleagues. Very nice to see you. Thank you for hearing items 1, 2, and 3. As I mentioned last week, we'll be making a series of amendments to the Planning Code amendment. These are the amendments that you have before you today, including the new office cap at 1.75 million square feet. And after discussion with my colleague, Supervisor Peskin over here, after discussion with his office, we are also proposing changes to other elements related to 4 things. First, references to describe the affordable housing Affordable Housing Program, the Historical Preservation Commission hearings, changes to timing as it's related to new construction and hearings for major modifications, and then finally, language related to the determination of completeness. Now, before you should have, I've circulated to you these changes, and because we still must hold a public hearing about the new withdrawn appeal at tomorrow's Board of Supervisors meeting, this committee is unable to adopt the amendments that you have before you today. However, I will be introducing these amendments tomorrow at the board and hope that you can support them. They will have to be re-referred back to the Land Use Committee meeting on October 30th to the substantive nature of the amendments. But with that, colleagues, I respectfully request that all of these items be sent to the full board with a positive recommendation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. Just to be clear, we can do this with a positive recommendation to our City Attorney's Office?
Deputy City Attorney John Givner, no.
Right,
you
okay.
can't take any action and you must send it out without recommendation.
Without recommendation.
Thank you for the clarification. Please just send it out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, Supervisor Cohen. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Farrell, and I just want to thank Supervisor Cohen and the port staff and planning staff for working cooperatively in the intervening week, and look forward to working with Supervisor Cohen to make these amendments at the full board tomorrow, and I'm happy to send the item without recommendation as advised by the City Attorney, and we can amend them tomorrow at the full board and then send them back for consideration next week.
Thanks. I got them. Okay. Thank you, Supervisor Peskin and Supervisor Cohen. With that, we will open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on items 1, 2, or 3 today? Okay. Seeing none, public comment is closed. So then can I entertain a motion to move this item forward as a committee report with no recommendation? Motion,
so moved.
Motion by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection. All right, Madam Clerk, would you go to item number 6?
Yes. Item number 6 is an ordinance amending the planning code to designate 1399 McAllister Street as a landmark under Article 10 of the Planning Code and affirming appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the landmark designation of the Third Baptist Church. I know Supervisor Bree to sponsor this legislation, and until her, if she does come, perhaps I could turn over to planning to do your presentation for the moment.
Sure. Can I have the PowerPoint? Thank you. Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Desiree Smith, Planning Department staff. I'm here today to present the landmark designation for the Third Baptist Church complex located at 1399 McAllister Street. The property was added to the Historic Preservation Commission's Landmark Designation Work Program on August 17, 2016, as part of the San Francisco Sites of Civil Rights Project, an initiative funded by an underrepresented communities grant from the National Park Service.
You don't like it?
It had previously been identified for potential listing through the draft African American Historic Context
Read the whole
Statement.
thing over this.
The landmark designation was expedited at the request of Third Baptist Church earlier this year. On August 16, 2017, the HPC unanimously recommended landmark designation of the property to this committee. Third Baptist Church is recommended for landmark status for its associations with significant historical events, persons from our past, and architecture. The Third Baptist Church complex is historically significant for its associations with the social, economic, and political advancement of African Americans in San Francisco, and for its association with civil rights leader Reverend Frederick Douglass Haynes. The current church complex was constructed by and for the congregation between 1952 and 1956 during the tenure of Reverend Haynes, who was pastor of Third Baptist Church from 1932 to 1971, and who was a tireless advocate for civil rights in San Francisco and across the nation. For the past 40 years, the congregation has continued to carry on this legacy of social justice activism under the guidance of Reverend Amos C. Brown. In addition, the church complex is architecturally significant as a rare and notable example of mid-century modern ecclesiastical architecture in San Francisco. The main church building was one of the first African-American Protestant churches constructed in San Francisco in the post-war era. Both the church building and the youth and classroom building display design elements characteristics of mid-century modern institutional buildings. There is no known public opposition to landmark designation. The church is supportive of the designation, and in addition, the department received 3 letters of support from community members. The department believes the building meets the established eligibility requirements, and the HPC recommends that landmark status is warranted. This concludes my presentations. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions? I believe Supervisor Peskin. And I want to acknowledge that Reverend Brown is also with us in the chambers. And when we go to public comment for Reverend Brown, if you would like to speak first, we would love to have you do that. Supervisor Peskin?
Thank you, Chair Farrell. And I wanted to say the case report is just an incredible read. I do know a little bit about the Third Baptist Church because its original site was on what used to be called DuPont, now Grant Avenue in North Beach between Filbert and Greenwich, or Greenwich as the old timers call it. I did not know a lot about this history. I knew the Amos Brown era, but I did not know the previous era of Mr. Haynes or his run for supervisor or his spouse being the first African-American woman elected to the school board or all of the incredible things that happened at Third Baptist, and the supporting documentation is really extraordinary, and I wanted to affix my name as a co-sponsor to the measure.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Madam Clerk, I would like to do the same as well. With that, we're going to open this up to public comment. Reverend Brown, if you would like to come forward, and anybody else who would like to speak afterwards, please feel free to come up to the microphone, and we can, after Reverend, we can line up on the far side of that wall, and we can take everybody one at a time. Thank you for being here, sir.
And before Reverend Brown says anything, I didn't know that the roots of this church go back to 1852.
Chairman Farrell, Supervisor Peskin, Supervisor Tang, I am incredibly pleased to be here this afternoon with congregants of Third Baptist Church. You know, Victor Hugo said, "Nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come." The idea came a few weeks ago that because of the storied, significant, substantive, and soulful legacy of Third Baptist Church, it was about time that this city, state, and nation give permanent historical status to the site located at 1399 McAllister Street. Yes, Supervisor Peskin, we are all, at best, continuous learners. None of us knows it all. And it is commendable that once truth is shared, there are sensible persons in our society who will respond to the truth and act on it and not be slaves to alternative facts. Fact number one about Third Baptist: it is the oldest historically predominant African American faith community in the western United States. It's founded on August the 1st, 1852, which was the anniversary of the abolition of slavery in the British West Indies. And it is also significant that the person who issued the call for the founding was a woman named Eliza Davis, who, along with her husband, William, became very disturbed over the fact that sons and daughters of darker hue were segregated in First Baptist Church that was founded in 1849. Blacks had to be in the balcony during those days. They couldn't go to the communion table at the same time that whites went. So Ms. Davis said, "This is not right. Our Maker did not order that anyone would be segregated in a house supposedly of holiness." So they marched out 1852, which was also the same year that Harry Beecher Stowe published that classic work, Uncle Tom's Cabin. When President Abraham Lincoln met her, he looked at her and said, "So you are the lady who wrote that little book that got this Civil War going." That war began, and we thank God that there were those who left the Southland, like Eliza and her husband, Fielding Spots and others, who came west looking for a better day and looking for freedom. But even in San Francisco, unfortunately, we had been tainted and tarnished with racism and exclusion of African Americans. Fast forward, permit me to say that the other thing that's significant about Third Baptist's current site is that the great scholar, historian, and economist W.E.B. Du Bois celebrated his 90th birthday on April the 13th, 1958, in the sanctuary of Third Baptist Church. When Paul Robeson first came back to the United States, his first appearance was before the sacred desk in Third Baptist, and he gave an incredible concert singing that sonorous baritone voice. When Dr. King came westward to let the West know about the great civil rights movement that was catapulted higher by the Montgomery boycott, his first appearance was at Third Baptist Church in 1957. So we thank you for your positive response to the truth, to the facts, and it will indeed underscore the fact that this Board of Supervisors has not considered the African American community to be an invisible people in San Francisco. So let us look forward to the celebration. We hope all of you will come when we will finalize what you have committed to give a kind of a rational, responsible ratification of, and you've shown that you know how to do the right thing. I have copies here with me of the historical celebration of the 150th anniversary. And I'm asking members of the congregation to give copies of that book to you, and each member of the board will receive a book that you may place in your private library. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend. And before Commissioner comes up, again, anybody else who would like to speak, please come forward and line up against the far wall, and everyone will have 2 minutes to speak. Commissioner, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Farrell, and to you and Supervisor Peskin and Supervisor Tang. Thank you this afternoon. My name is Leona Bridges, and I'm a member of this historic Third Baptist Church of San Francisco, and I also serve as a commissioner on the San Francisco Employees Retirement System. I can't come behind Reverend Brown because he is the best historian in the world. You know that from just listening to him. But I would like to say, as part of the Third Baptist Church congregation, it is so important with the outmigration of African Americans in San Francisco that we preserve the legacy and preserve historical sites so generations to come can see what the history is of African Americans has been and will be in San Francisco. Right now, we suffer of losing a lot of those sites. And what Reverend Brown and this congregation has embarked to do is preserving that history. And Reverend Brown is probably the best in the world at preserving everything. So I would like to thank you for your sponsorship and thank you for supporting this effort. And I pray that other things will come before you where we preserve the legacy of African Americans in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bridges. Next speaker, please.
To the presiding officer of the board, all members in respectful order, I'm duly blessed. I worked for the city and county of San Francisco for 39 years, and I retired from the city. But I was blessed to be a member of Third Baptist when Dr. Brown came. I've been a member for 42 years, just a little before Pastor Brown came. And I have been blessed to serve under Pastor Brown's leadership. I was a deacon, and after a while, Pastor Brown was there 30 years ago. He ordained me as a minister. So I've been one of the assistant ministers to Dr. Brown's administration, and I've had an opportunity to meet many members of the fellowship. And I am continuing to be blessed as a witness, as a servant, and I was there for the 40th anniversary some time ago. So I'm very thankful to be here. I've been here before, and I do thank you for going through the process wherein we stand here today for this well-deserved, outstanding dedication. So I want to thank you, and I thank you for my wife, who was responsible for me joining Third Baptist Church. She couldn't make it today, but thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Yes, thank you, ladies and gentlemen of city government. I am A.J. Jelani. I am the creator of the Seal of the African American. I'm also a member of Third Baptist Church of San Francisco, Honorable Pastor Amos C. Brown, in which I'm so delighted to be a part of the activities and the people, the lovely people that surround that God's sent environment. The issue goes deeper than you think. I want to say thank you, first of all, before I forget, that you can see the honor and the dignity in which the church has brought to our community. As in Africa, as we understand it, they came over here on a ship. The ship brought slaves. They were Africans over there, they were Africans over here until the blood mixed. African Americans are mixed with everybody's blood, white, black, Indian, Chinese, Jewish, you name it, they got it. And that's how you got African American. The very name itself denotes what it's all about. We helped build this country, put this country on the map. Cotton, corn, and cane. That's what made it. And it took advantage of the labor, free labor. And so therefore you have a people now that has struggled for many years to obtain very little as far as rights and freedom, justice, and equality. Now we got our freedom, but the fight now is justice. We'll get equality later on. We'll work on that later on. But right now, the fight is justice. But I just wanted to say that I just want to thank Third Baptist Church and the wonderful membership for being here and standing for what God has done. They are a testimony of what God can do for our people. Stay prayed up. Any Bible that you read, if it don't have love God and love thy neighbor, don't use it. That's what it's all about. You can get the name wrong and whatever, but if it don't say love God first, and it don't say love thy neighbor, you don't need that Bible. That's the wrong one, okay? So I just want to say thank y'all so much. And the Honorable Amos C. Brown, I just love him and his family. They know how I feel about him. So I love you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, Doctor.
Yes. Good afternoon. To the chairperson of this committee, Mark Farrell, and to Supervisor Peskin, and to Supervisor Tang. My name is Dr. Sidonia Wilson, former president of the San Francisco Unified School District Board of Education. I am very, very pleased that you have seen the importance of approving this request of us from Third Baptist Church, because Third Baptist has been on the forefront of many issues in the city of San Francisco, and especially from the educational issues. We are very strongly supporting the education of young people, and at this point in time, we really need the support very much so. And so I'd like to say, we thank you very much for this accepting us, making us a historical event. I've been a member of this church since my teens, and I'm very pleased that this is happening today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wish to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, public comment is now closed.
Chair Farrell, obviously I'd love to send this to the full board with a unanimous positive recommendation. I also wanted to take a moment, because part of the case report speaks about the history of redevelopment. I think it's significant, and the role that Dr. Haynes played in that, albeit the Third Baptist Church was not directly in the line of the bulldozers, and that's in there. But I think in light of the fact that last week the Rec and Park Commission fell one vote short of heeding the unanimous urging of this board to remove the name of Justin Herman from that plaza at the base of Market Street, which I hope they will reconsider next month, that hopefully we will get this the landmark designation that it has long deserved, as well as address that other terrible chapter in San Francisco history that particularly and disproportionately impacted the Fillmore. With that, I would like to make a motion to send the matter to the full board with recommendation, and I am delighted that to co-sponsor it, and delighted that Chair Farrell is co-sponsoring it as well.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a motion by Supervisor Peskin, and we can take that without objection. Congratulations. With that, Madam Clerk, would you call item number 5?
Yes, item number 5 is a resolution approving the jurisdictional transfer of 2245 Gerald Avenue of the City and County of San Francisco currently under the jurisdiction of the Real Estate Division to the Fire Department.
Okay, colleagues, we will just have staff present on this item. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon. I'm Sandy Levine from the Real Estate Division, and this is a very simple jurisdictional transfer from real estate to the San Francisco Fire Department. The entire block of space is being used to develop a new ambulance deployment facility, and this small bit of land across is going to be the only entrance in the side streets. It's like a driveway, so it's long and narrow and not suitable to build anything on other than to become part of the already controlled by the San Francisco Fire Department portion of the parcel.
Okay, great. Colleagues, any questions? Comments? Okay, we'll open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 5? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, should I have a motion to send this item forward to the full board?
So moved.
Okay. We have a motion by Supervisor Tang, and we can take that without objection. All right. With that, we are on to our last item. And I know Supervisor Kim was going to be here.
Are you looking at me?
I don't know. Yeah. Do we have planning staff here for the last item?
5-minute recess.
Okay, we're going to go into a 5-minute recess, and we'll try and get everyone in the room. Thanks, everyone. Okay, thank you, everybody. We are back from recess for our Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting from Monday, October 23rd, 2017. We are on item number 4. This is a hearing on the proposed Central SOMA plan. The need for this began during the 2008 Eastern Neighborhoods planning process, and planning and OEWD have been engaged in community outreach effort for a number of years at this point. We're getting close to the finish line with a series of informational hearings at our Land Use and Transportation Committee before this is potentially taken up with legislation. Today's hearing is going to focus on jobs and housing, and this plan resides in Supervisor Kim's district. I want to recognize her and thank her for coming to committee today.
Chair
This
Farrell,
hearing.
would you like me to call the item?
I thought you did call it. Oh my goodness! Could you call item number 4, please?
Item number 4 is a hearing on the proposed Central SOMA plan, divided into 2 different presentations on general overview of the plan, housing overview, infrastructure, and the public realm, and community building and neighborhood stabilization.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will not repeat what I just said, but with that, I will turn over, thank you, to Supervisor Kim, who sponsored this hearing. And again, this is all resides within her district.
Thank you, Chair Farrell. The Central SOMA plan has been a long time coming. In fact, I was just relaying with my colleagues, in my first few months on the Board of Supervisors back in January 2011, I remember getting my first briefing on the Central SOMA plan, which had been in the works for at least, I believe, for 2 years at that point, and was really... And the study was triggered by the commitment to develop and build the Central Subway Corridor, which is in construction today, and anticipating this new public transit line, how we could enhance and upzone this part of the South of Market to create more housing and more jobs for the city and county of San Francisco. This area in Central SOMA offers a multitude of underdeveloped parcels near a transit-rich area, which also includes, as I mentioned, our investment into the Central Subway and into the future Transbay Terminal with the public transit lines that will enter through there. Central SOMA is the perfect place to accommodate our jobs and housing growth, which according to ABAG shows that we can accommodate potentially 68,000 households and 154,000 jobs by 2035 for San Francisco. As many of you know, housing balance and the creation of not just market rate housing, but also affordable and middle income housing has been a priority in my work. And so it has been a priority, and I want to thank the Planning Department for ensuring that we achieve a balance of 33% of affordable and affordable housing to the market rate housing that is built in this plan, and that our stock is reflective of current residents and new population of our workers, including entry-level tech workers, teachers, nurses, and custodians. Per the latest report of Housing Balance, which was released by the Planning Department over the summer, 23% of our new units over a 10-year count between 2007 and 2016 have been affordable, much of which 50% occurs in our district, but we still have a ways to go to achieve this balance. The Central SOMA plan does honor the voter mandate set by the 2014 Prop K, where 33% of new housing units are affordable, but I do have some follow-up questions on some of the numbers that the Planning Department has put forward. So today we have asked the Planning Department and the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development to come to the Land Use Committee to begin to address these questions. Now, the EIR is in circulation, and that presentation and plan has not gone before the Planning Commission yet, but it was important to me that we start having these public hearings early here at the Land Use Committee with members of the committee and also members of the Land Use Committee so that we can begin to start developing and giving input and having a conversation around some of the overarching goals that we would like to see in the Central SOMA plan. And I just want to say, whenever we embark on a major area plan, which I think this is my third since my time on the Board of Supervisors just in District 6, we have a lot of hopes for what we hope that we can achieve in a plan. We want to make sure that we're protecting manufacturing and artists and PDR and zoning. We also want to make sure that we're creating enough space for the new jobs that want to be here in San Francisco. And we want to also ensure that we're meeting our housing demand, both of existing jobs that have been created and the new jobs that we're anticipating will be created. And all of that, and on top of all of that, we want to make sure that we have the infrastructure, the roadways, the parks, and others to ensure that we meet the balance of the new demand of these workers and residents. So I do want to acknowledge that it is a very complex balancing process that we ask the planning department to put together in a singular plan. And of course, there is the entire city on top of that. But I think that there's certainly a lot of questions that members of the community will have, and so that's why we've divided up the hearing into 3 parts. So today's hearing is focused on the jobs housing balance, the percentage of affordable housing, and also the impact of this recent bill of state legislation around housing to the Central Soma Plan. In the future, I've also called for a hearing on infrastructure and open space and on community benefits as well. But today's hearing will be focused on the jobs housing balance, state bills and how they'll impact housing development in the Central Soma Plan, and the percentage of affordable housing that will be built within the Central Soma Plan. So with that, if there are no further comments from colleagues on Land Use Committee, I'd like to call up John Ram, the director of our Planning Department, who is joined by Steve Wertheim, who has really spent a lot of time on this plan. Thank you. And I also see that Josh Swiskey is here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, supervisors. Appreciate that introduction, and I appreciate the time today. And I also that we're having these hearings essentially at the same time we're having a series of planning commission hearings. It's actually quite helpful to be doing these hearings at the same time. My name is John Ram. I'm the director of the planning department. It's my great honor to be here today to introduce the series of hearings on this plan. I realized on the way over that of all the recent plans that we've done, this is the only one that will have started and hopefully been completed on my watch. So all the other plans I inherited halfway through or partway through, or maybe 80% of the way through. So as both Supervisors Farrell and Kim mentioned, the original impetus for this plan goes back to the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan, which was adopted almost 10 years ago now. And in the very late stages of that plan, I think we collectively realized that we needed to take a fresh look at this part of Central Soma, of South of Market, which we later dubbed Central Soma in relation to recognize the presence of the future at that time Central Subway, which had not yet started construction. And I think we all realized that we needed to take a fresh look and saw this area as a place to accommodate job and housing growth in the city, as Supervisor Kim has said. So since that time, of course, we experienced a serious recession and have experienced extraordinary growth in the city, or the fastest growth in probably a century that we're seeing in the city. And we realize that there is a kind of paradigm shift happening out there, which is that a growing number of people, particularly of my generation, the baby boomer generation, and the millennial generation, want to be in cities in a big way. And they want to live in walkable, transit-oriented neighborhoods. And of course, Central Soma is one such neighborhood, which does, in fact, have the capacity to add a lot of jobs and housing over the coming years. So really, we do believe that Central Soma can be a significant part of the city's response to this demand for job and housing growth in the city. It's extremely well located. It has the transit access, the open space access, the access to downtown, and to the regional transportation system, whether it's highways or transit. And there is, and we believe, and I think you all know, there is a fair amount of large development sites that can accommodate a good part of that growth. So that's the impetus for this plan. I think you all know that's why we did this. The original reason has shifted and kind of really become more acute in light of recent development in recent years and the city's economic growth. Briefly on the timeline, I just want to briefly go over the timeline, very briefly, the community outreach, and kind of what we've learned from the previous plans. And then I will turn it over to Steve to talk about some of the details. So we started in earnest in 2011, started the EIR in 2013, and the draft plan was released in 2016. The EIR, as you know, has been out for a while now this year. We've had hearings at the Planning Commission. We will continue to have a series of hearings at the Planning Commission this fall, and we hope to initiate legislation at the Commission later this year. The goal is to be in front of you in the first quarter of next year. I'm hoping against all odds that we can make that goal. We've had some delays in the EIR, but we are pretty much on track to try to meet that schedule. In total, we've had 10 hearings at the Planning Commission to date. We have had 10 large community meetings, and we have been out in the community at least 30 times going to various neighborhood meetings and anyone who has requested, we have gone. That's been our strategy here, is to meet people on their terms rather than organizing meetings that on our terms. I will say that I think it's important just to talk briefly about what we've learned from the other plans and why this one is perhaps a bit different. First of all, on the outreach and communication side, we have, as I said, tried to involve people on their terms, go to their community meetings, their regularly scheduled meetings. In addition to other forums such as surveys, we even had an on-site storefront for a while, or we had people drop in and give us their comments. We've had a preference for small groups. Those seem to be most effective, have a way of allowing people to participate in those discussions. And I think the document itself is different than our previous plans. It's meant to be more user-friendly, more topic-based rather than planner speak, if you will. With respect to the EIR, it's much more inclusive than past EIRs. We've learned as we've gone through the community plan evaluation processes, or CPEs, with projects, that there are things we can do with the plan EIR that will help us facilitate project approvals after the plan is adopted. So we are trying to incorporate those ideas into this EIR as well. And thirdly, we did a lot more front-loading in this plan than we did with the previous neighborhood plans. We front-loaded the transportation and preservation analysis. That's done. And if you recall, in the Eastern Neighborhood Plan, it happened after the plan was adopted. We have met Prop K, as Supervisor Kim mentioned, and we believe we can meet the 33% affordable housing target that was found in Prop A, and the intent with the recent Prop X to actually have no net loss of PDR space. That's something that's quite dramatically different from the previous neighborhood plans. We have been also much more proactive about cultural preservation, such as the Soma Pilipinas work that we've been working on with Supervisor Kim's office. We are much more focused on creating an eco-district here, so the sustainability factor has been wrapped up substantially from previous plans. And we think that we can be much more self-sufficient with respect to public benefits. Because of the density of development here, because of the Mello-Roos and impact fees, we can actually address many of the public benefits in this plan that other plans were not able to develop because they did not have the density of development that occurs on this site. So we have worked very closely with all the other agencies on this plan, particularly on the package of public benefits, to understand how much should go to affordable housing, transportation, open space, and so on. All of the other city agencies have been involved in these processes and these discussions over the last couple of years. And we feel like we have a really solid piece of work here that really learns from the best of the plans from the past and can learn from as we move forward with these planning efforts. So I'm quite excited about this plan. I think it's a really spectacular piece of work. And I want to introduce Steve Wertheim, whose baby this has been. Steve has had 2 children in the meantime as this plan has been developed, and of course this is his third, which I think he deserves in a very big way. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve. Thank you.
And Steve, just having attended some of the community meetings with you where you've been fielding the not so happy feedback around the plan, I do appreciate the additional time that you spent with many members of our community.
My pleasure. Steve Wertheim, Planning Department staff, project manager for the Central Soma Plan, and now you know a lot about my family life. This is the most well-behaved of my children, so at least I have that going for me. Today's presentation has 3 aspects to it. We've already heard a lot about the overview. I'll continue with the broad overview of the plan, then we'll move to the strategy for building new housing in Central Soma, and then the third part, the jobs-housing relationship, in which will be presented to you by my colleague, Joshua Switsky. We've heard a lot about the plan impetus. I won't go into much detail about this, except that we all know that high growth demand is causing social, economic, environmental issues in San Francisco. People want to be here for all kinds of environmental, economic, social, quality of life reasons, and we haven't necessarily built the space to accommodate them. Central Soma is a sensible place to accommodate that growth, great transit from a regional perspective, great location between downtown and Mission Bay, tons of developable land, and a great place to harness the energy of development to provide substantial public benefits for the community. The plan area runs from 2nd Street to the east, 6th Street to the west, Townsend Street to the south, and the jog to the north represents the border with the downtown plan area. 2 blocks on either side of the central subway, which will increase connectivity tremendously between this neighborhood and Chinatown to the north and Bayview to the south. And this area is all part of the eastern neighborhoods and thus subject to all of its rules, requirements, and oversight. The plan vision is quite straightforward: a sustainable neighborhood, in that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, and sustainable in all of the aspects: social, environmental, and economic. What does that mean from a little bit more grounded perspective? We want to keep what's great in the neighborhood and fix what's not. There's a lot of great things in Central Soma. There's a tremendous diversity of residents and jobs. There's a tremendous diversity of buildings and architecture unique to the city. As I mentioned, there's abundant local and regional transit.
Mr. Wertheim,
Yes, sir.
There hasn't been anything up on the screen for a while, and I just thought maybe somebody has to press some magic button.
Thanks. We could SFG TV, Gov TV, sorry.
I wish I had that magic button. That would make things a lot easier. I'm happy to pause.
If you could just use the overhead for now, there's some technical difficulties with the laptop.
I will. Sorry if this is a little bit awkward. Okay, we'll just skip through first couple of slides that I've already spoken to. Okay, are we good? I wish I'd groomed a little bit more before this hearing. So keep what's great and address what's not. As I mentioned, tremendous unique diversity of residents and jobs in this neighborhood, unique diversity of buildings and architecture, fabulous transit from a regional perspective, and renowned culture and nightlife. As we know, there's a lot of things that aren't great about this neighborhood. The rents are unaffordable. This is not unique to Central Soma, but it's certainly a condition that is acute here. The streets are quite unsafe and unpleasant for people walking and bicycling. The sidewalks are too narrow. The blocks are extremely long. It's very difficult to cross. This has been a Vision Zero hotspot for the city. There's a distinct lack of parks and greenery. There's basically South Park and nothing else. And there's inefficient zoning in that the area's been, most of it's been industrially zoned for the last few decades. And the counterpoint to that is there's insufficient funding because we can't develop in the area to fund the benefits that can make the neighborhood better. The plan has 8 goals to convey how we're going to fix what's, keep what's great and fix what's not. The goals are as follows. 1, accommodate a substantial amount of jobs and housing. 2, maintain the diversity of residents. 3, facilitate an economically diversified and lively job center. 4, provide safe and convenient transportation that prioritizes walking, bicycling, and transit. Thanks, Josh. Perfect. Takes a village. 5, offer an abundance of parks and recreational opportunities. 6, create an environmentally sustainable and resilient neighborhood. 7, preserve and celebrate the neighborhood's cultural heritage. 8, ensure that new buildings enhance the character of the neighborhood and the city. These are the 8 chapters of the Central Soma Plan, each of which has their own objectives, policies, and implementation measures, all of which feed back up to the notion of creating a sustainable neighborhood. Even though there is these 8 goals and dozens of objectives and over 100 policy and implementation measures, you can really boil down the essence of the plan to these 3 strategies: accommodate demand, provide public benefits, and respect and enhance the neighborhood character. In terms of how to accommodate demand, this map tries to distill the concepts around both zoning and heights into some simple concepts. On the left, you have the existing development capacity. The areas in white have no development capacity. They're either industrially zoned or public right-of-way. The areas in yellow have development capacity up to 85 feet, and the area in red, adjacent to downtown, has development capacity up to 130 feet. On the right, you see the proposed development capacity through the Central SOMA Plan. We've removed much of the industrially protective zoning while, as we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, making sure that we don't lose any industrial space due to that change. And we focused the new development on the area adjacent to downtown in the northeast part of the plan area and the area adjacent to Caltrain in the southwest part of the plan area. We've done some 3D rendering of what this might look like. Here's the area with existing development. Here's what it might look like with future development. One of the downsides of this overhead format is I can't just toggle back and forth between the two and ooh and ah you guys with how that looks between before and after, but the presentation is attached to your hearing, and we can share that. The most important thing is that areas in blue are outside of Central SOMA. These are projects that we know about. For example, those about far along in their process, like Mission Bay Mission Rock to the bottom right, or things like the Salesforce Tower, which are almost fully complete. The area in yellow is within Central SOMA, and the 3 main takeaways for Central SOMA are as follows. 1, there are a lot of developable parcels in Central SOMA. 2, as I said, most of the development is focused on the northeast part of the plan area and the southwest part of the plan area. And 3rd, because the parcels in Central SOMA are so large, we're really focusing on having density in a horizontal way versus the towers of downtown is the way to get density. Central SOMA is a place we're having horizontal density. The result of this development is we expect space for about 40,000 new jobs and 7,625 housing units. My colleague Josh Switzky will talk in a couple of minutes about why there's such a high ratio of jobs to housing proposed in the plan area, and I'll also speak in a couple of minutes as to how we're going to get to exactly the 7,625 units. Moving on to public benefits and neighborhood character. If the plan were not to pass, we'd still have room for about $500 million in public benefits due to the development that could occur today in the areas north of the freeway that are already zoned to allow for housing and jobs. However, were the plan to pass, we could quadruple that amount of public benefits, over $2 billion. And this is all from development putting money back into the neighborhood. This doesn't count money that comes from development that goes to the general fund. That's another $1 billion. And these monies are expected over the 25-year life cycle of the plan. What does this get us specifically? Nearly $1 billion are necessary for us to achieve 33% affordable housing in the district. We still have $500 million left for transit for improvements to local and regional service. $180 million towards production, distribution, and repair to make sure there's no net loss of PDR due to the plan. We have $160 million for parks and recreation for a couple of new parks, a new recreation center, and rehabilitation of important parks adjacent to the plan, including Jean Friend and Victoria Manilow Draves. We have $130 million towards complete streets, which is to widen all the sidewalks, provide protected bike lanes, make it easier to cross, and basically fulfill all the goals of Vision Zero in this neighborhood. We have $70 million towards environmental sustainability to proactively make the neighborhood cleaner and more resilient as the world's climate changes. We have $50 million towards schools and childcare. We have $40 million towards cultural preservation, including a chunk of money to help facilitate the rehabilitation of the Old Mint and other money for historic buildings for the first time outside of downtown, being able to sell their development rights and use that to help rehabilitate their buildings. We have $20 million towards community services. That's money to help build new facilities such as job training centers and healthcare clinics. And finally, we have this row that says to be determined. We've been fortunate to ascertained that there's about $30 more million that we haven't even planned for yet. And at the same time, there seems to be a tremendous opportunity presenting itself that we could start using this money towards social services, which is something that plans haven't historically done because, as we know, impact fees need to go towards capital infrastructure, but we're also having Melrose Community Facilities District in this area, and it may be possible to use this money for community facilities, which is something we're really excited about, as potentially the funding for SOMA stabilization, for example, is running out in a couple of years. This is one way that we could continue that funding for decades to come. In addition to all the funding, we have a few strategies that don't cost anything but are really important to making the neighborhood great. This includes requiring active ground floor uses so that the neighborhood's really walkable and interesting, protecting our landmark buildings, limiting lot mergers on those blocks that already have a fine-grained character of interesting buildings, making sure those maintain in the future, and probably most importantly, continuing to engage our community partners such as Soma Pilipinas. So now let's move to discussing our strategy for new housing. Last week you received from us a memo detailing this strategy. That memo is also available for public review on our website and via the agenda to this hearing. But here are some of the high-level takeaways from that memo. So as I mentioned earlier, we expect up to 7,625 units in the plan area due to the plan. And we expect 2,500 of them to be affordable, which yields an affordability percentage of 33%, which, as my director mentioned, meets the target of Prop K, which ran through 2020 and extends that via Central Soma Plan for a couple more decades.
Mr. Wortham, can I ask a quick question here? So something that's been a little confusing around this projected number of 7,625 units that will be built if Central Soma Plan is fully built out, contradicts with the number that you have in the draft EIR, which says that by 2040, Central Soma Plan will build 14,500 units of housing. So could you explain that discrepancy?
Absolutely. So there are three reasons that the EIR is going to have a higher number than this number in front of us. The most fundamental one is that the EIR studies an area that is bigger than the current plan area. The EIR studied an area that went all the way to Market Street. Same east-west, 2nd to 6th, but we went all the way to Market Street. And we'd included this area in the EIR mostly so that we could to make improvements to the street right-of-way, to make 3rd and 4th more walkable, for example, et cetera. So there was a bigger geography, but we realized we weren't actually changing any of the zoning in that area. So for finalizing the plan, we decided to take that part out, even though the numbers were studied in the EIR. So that's about 6,000 of the units we expect in that area. The two other reasons are that this EIR was very conservative in the number of housing units, so that it's more important for when you do an EIR, and I'm not a CEQA expert, but you want to have some cushion, you want to have some flexibility. You want to study too much and assume too many environmental impacts so that you can be truly conservative in that, making sure that your mitigation measures account for that. So the EIR has a higher number of units than we actually expect. And the third reason is that there are some heights studied in the EIR that are lower than we're proposing in the plan. Right? So that's probably the hierarchy of reasons that the number is higher. If you look at the actual change in the units due to Central Soma, it's the same whether or not you include the other part of the area or just Central Soma. We're only changing the zoning in the eastern neighborhoods portion. I hope that's clear, but I'm happy to answer more questions on that.
No, it is. And actually, just to ask about the first point that you made, that the EIR studied a larger plan than the proposed Central Soma boundary lines. You said that outside of the Central Soma Plan, doing no upzoning, how many units of housing could be built or developable?
Our analysis that we did probably back in 2013 to feed into the EIR said about 6,000 units in that area.
Outside of the Central
Outside of Central Soma, yeah.
Are potentially developable just based on current zoning?
Just based on current zoning, they're all C3 zoned areas. Some of it's in the transit center, for example.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that? I understand that the EIR should evaluate the most impactful alternative, and I understand, although I don't necessarily agree with the argument that some of the areas currently zoned for housing and should not be considered, but separate and apart from that, there's a 300% difference between 7,600 units and 22,300 units. In other words, in the
With
EIR,
22,300 is probably existing in units plus new units, right?
Well,
I'm
what
not sure
it
the
says
22,000
here-
is exactly, but there's about 5,400 units existing in the area. So I'd imagine the end of the day, and that's within the boundaries of the proposed plan area. So there's probably another couple of thousand in the downtown portion, and that may be how we get to 22,000. So if there's like 8,000 extant units, and 14,000 that are developable over, we'll call it the square of the area between, actually, thanks, Josh. Let's go with it, just if we're talking plan area.
Well,
Here's
just
the
to
map.
clarify on what Supervisor Peskin brought up, what he's bringing up is that if we did nothing, the EIR states that this plan would build 5,500 units of housing.
Mhm.
And with the proposed upzoning, that's an additional 14,500. So, sorry to interrupt Supervisor Peskin,
No,
but
no
I think
problem.
that was part of your question, right?
Yeah, well, the chart that I'm reading from the EIR has a baseline number, which I assume is extant units as of 2010, of 7,800, and a Central Soma plan 2040, presumably full build-out at 22,300.
Right, so that would be the increase that Supervisor Kim was referencing of about 14,500 new units in the area. If you're looking at this map, if you went all the way, if you carried the second and sixth lines all the way up to Market Street, then you would see 8,000 existing units and 14,500 new units in that area, of which we expect, through no change in zoning at all, about 6,000 units to occur in the area north of the boundary that's in the central.
And that's
in the
your
C3.
no project column.
Right. And of course, there's a bunch of units that could occur, say, north of Harrison Street already because they're already zoned mixed-use office, mixed-use residential, mixed-use general. So there's, even if there's a no project, you could still see a bunch of units. What Central Soma is saying is that with adoption of the project, we could see 7,625 new units in the boundary that you see in yellow on this map right here. I'm sorry if that's not super clear. I'm happy to write you guys a memo or something trying to piece out how the two portions are different. But that's, at the end of the day, we would wind up with the same number of units if we drew the box differently with the plan or without the plan. It's just carving out some of this area. It probably complicated the conversation.
I think what you're saying, I think I understand what you're saying, not that I necessarily agree with the fact that we should not capture affordability in the no project alternative, given the amount of value that will be generated, but the numbers still don't totally make sense, because if you're taking your 22,300 number in the EIR and subtracting the 16,800 number, which is the no project housing build out, that's not 7,625 units, that's like 5,000 units. But anyway, we don't have to figure it all out today. But as a general comment, if Chair Farrell will indulge me, it just seems like that number, given the amount of upzoning that we are talking about relative to housing units, just seems to me to be kind of small.
The number of housing units altogether? Within Central Soma, because housing is about 1/5 as dense as jobs, the amount of square footage is relatively similar between the two uses. And I'll let my colleague Josh talk to all the reasons why, from a citywide and regional perspective, this is a good place to have jobs. So maybe I'll just continue with my presentation and we can let Josh do that, and then we can have that existential conversation.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Yeah.
Wertheim, just before you keep
Please.
going.
Yeah.
Because actually, I appreciate the point that Supervisor Peskin brought up. I should have actually looked at the total number, the 22,300 units that the EIR is projecting would be built with the Central Soma plan. Of the 22,300, you said that 6,000 are units that would be built now what is outside the boundaries of the demarcated Central Soma plan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I think I understand Supervisor Peskin's question. So when you minus the 6,000 from that 22,000, right, you're still at 16,300 that could be built just within the demarcated plan?
Well, okay, so we have to parse that out a little bit. There's 8,000 or so existing units, right? So we're not studying that for the EIR purposes of new growth. We study that for purposes of that's the baseline, right? So nothing ever gets built in this area. Then there's the no projects, quote unquote, where things that can get built anyway without the plan can happen. So there's areas that built housing can happen right now. And then there's a third layer where Central Soma is approved and there's much more housing that can be built in the Central Soma plan area today. The area outside of Central Soma, and there's a bunch of parcels that were not upzoning as part of Central Soma, don't change with or without the plan. So there's 8,000 existing units, then the 14,000 is new units over the whole, we'll call it the square. Of those 14,500 new units, we expect 6,000 to be outside of the boundaries of what's now Central Soma. So now we're down to 8,500 units remaining. And 8,500 units is higher than we studied in...
Got it.
It's probably even higher than, there's probably even more that we studied as part of Central Soma. So that we have a cushion in Central Soma because the EIR studied more housing for purposes of being conservative in the environmental review.
Chair Farrell?
Supervisor Peskin?
But here's what the numbers boil down to on table 4-1, summary of growth projections from the EIR, which is if you do nothing, you get 9,000 units. And if you do your plan, you get an additional 5,500. That's what this says. That seems like a pretty small amount.
So if there's about 16 million square feet of development potential in Central Soma, right? So that's about, say, 7 million square feet or so of housing, and 9 million square feet of non-housing, right? Mostly office, but retail, PDR, hotels, et cetera. Right? I mean, we'll talk about it, but housing is so much, jobs are so much more dense than housing necessarily, that is why the numbers are small. If you guys want to figure out how to increase the amount of housing in the plan area, this is obviously your discretion, and we'll continue to talk about that.
Well, I think it's a public policy conversation worth having because, as we know, there is an inextricable link between job growth and housing demand, right? So insofar as there seems to be a citywide consensus that we are trying to meet extant housing demand, but we're generating more housing demand in a lopsided number where you have out of 16 million square feet, the majority of it going to uses that create more demand and a minority going to both meeting that demand and extant demand. Doesn't that, I mean, maybe I'm late to this game and I'm missing something.
We will, if I'm up to about slide 15, if you wait till about slide 22, we can have our version of why this makes sense, and then we can continue that conversation if you're okay with that.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim?
Yeah.
All right, let's do that.
Okay, so getting back to 2,500 affordable units, how are we going to get there? So about 1,700 of those units would be required of market rate affordable housing, their contribution via the inclusionary housing requirements of Planning Code Section 415. Then we get another 700 units from the Jobs Housing Linkage Fee, which is applied to non-residential projects. And then there's another 80 units that could come from city-funded units on a city-owned site at 4th and Folsom that's above the new Central Subway station there. Where might these new units be located? We already know of 2 100% affordable sites in the process, the one I just mentioned at 4th and Folsom, and another 200 units at 921 Howard near 5th. That's a partnership between Tishman Speyer and TNDC. We also know that TNDC owns the site at 5th and Howard as well, and there's potential for at least 100 units at that location. And then we've been working really hard with the development community and the neighborhood to figure out how to carve out affordable housing sites from the large office developments. The parcels are so large that there's a real opportunity here, and that includes about 100 potential units at the corner of 4th and Harrison, and the site being developed by Boston Properties, another 100 units on the site between 4th, 5th, Brennan, and Bryant, that is being proposed by Tishman Speyer, and another 100 units directly south of that at the tennis club site being proposed by TMG in Alexandria. Oh, sorry, there's a bunch of purple dots on this side I want to talk about too. These are the potential on-site locations. Not all of these sites will certainly develop as housing and do their housing on site, but as an example of how the affordable housing from on-site units can be spread throughout the neighborhood. Finally, let's talk about some other considerations around housing and ways to make it potentially be built faster and potentially have more of it. The first factor is the state density bonus. As you're all aware, the state density bonus is an incentive to increase development capacity for projects to build their affordable units on site. It's unclear yet how this will apply to Central Soma because we're already providing such a large upzoning through the project. It's also unclear how many sites will avail themselves of this strategy. We don't have a ton in the planning department right now citywide, but if all the sites were allowed to apply this and did, we could have a maximum of about 1,000 more units in the plan area, and all these units, for the bonus units, must meet the requirements of Section 415, which means that we would not be hurting our affordability percentage in this regard. The second issue is the slate of legislation recently passed by the state, of which I'm going to focus on two issues, SB 35 and AB 73. SB 35 requires housing be ministerially approved in areas that don't meet the regional housing needs allocation. In this case, ministerial means no CEQA and no discretionary approval necessary from such bodies as the Planning Commission. Because San Francisco has met its target for market rate housing, this will not apply here for the next few years, but we are required to provide ministerial approval of affordable housing. Another important new legislation is AB 73 that allows cities to opt in providing affordable, to having ministerial housing through quote-unquote sustainability districts, in which the state would provide incentive money for the city to do so. And the housing would be ministerial if it provided prevailing wage. So if Central Soma would become a sustainability district under AB 73, we could expedite the approval of housing. Finally, there's the mayor's recent executive directive on housing. It requires city agencies to speed up the production of housing. The goal is to speed up the housing entitlement and post-entitlement process by nearly half. The planning department and building department have been tasked with developing our strategy by December 1st for how to facilitate expediting the entitlement process. The rest of the city has been tasked by January 1st to figure out how to expedite the post-entitlement process. So you'll be hearing more on this soon, and we certainly anticipate some of the strategies will require legislation that would come before you. With that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Josh Switzky to talk about the relationship between jobs and housing.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Joshua Switzky with planning staff. So this key question of the relationship between jobs and housing, to start with, it's really fundamentally at its core a regional issue. We need to house all of our workers, and you need to have approximately 1.3 housing units, 0.75 housing units for every worker somewhere in the region. We have a density in the Bay Area and generally across the country of about 1.3 workers per household. And so Plan Bay Area, which was just recently adopted, an update to it, this was our second go-around in the last few years, is the region's stab at undertaking that direct transportation land use connection and meeting state-mandated greenhouse gas reduction obligations under SB 375. The other obligation of Plan Bay Area is to house all of the worker growth in the region within the 9-county region so that we don't import workers from the Central Valley and other adjacent regions. Plan Bay Area projects that between 2010, which is a few years ago, and 2040, which is the plan's horizon, that the region will grow by a little bit over 800,000 households and about 1.3 million jobs. Obviously, some of that has already occurred in the first 7 years of the period. And the focus of the plan, the way that the region sees that it can meet these obligations, particularly the greenhouse gas state-mandated obligation, is to grow in an infill manner in the urban areas of the region, particularly near public transit. And the focus is on what are called priority development areas, which have been self-identified by cities around the region as good places to grow to meet that obligation. And the plan, as you can see in this little graphic on the upper right, has a big focus on the 3 big cities of the region, San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose, to bear between 40 and 50% of the region's growth over the coming years. The rest of the Bayside communities a little bit down from that, and then the peripheral areas very little. And San Francisco's share of that are these numbers. About 138,000 of those 820,000 households are expected to be, and the region hopes will be accommodated in San Francisco, and about 290,000 of those 1.3 million jobs. An important note on that job number looks big. It is big, but it's an important point that the 2010, which is the base year of the regional plan, was the depth of the recession, and there was a lot of jobs lost just prior to that. So we were at a 10+% unemployment rate and so forth. And so there was a lot of jobs gained in just digging out of that recession, and we've gained obviously net since then. And if San Francisco builds out according to this plan, with this number of households and this number of jobs, we will actually have more housing units per job in 2040 than we do today. So we will have a lower jobs housing ratio than we do today. Right now, we're at about 1.75 jobs per housing unit, which is where we have been, and it hasn't really budged for the last 30 or 40 years. But we would continue to actually add more housing per job than we have, than has been the case in past decades. Where would that be accommodated? We've crunched all the numbers. We've done a lot of analysis of both our existing zoning around the city as well as the various proposals that are on the table today. From a job standpoint, if the plans that are on the table today, including this one, plans like Pier 70 and Mission Rock, which still have to come through the board, get approved, the city would have a capacity for about 170,000 more jobs from today. That's less than the 290 I just showed you because we have accommodated a lot of those 290 already. So the balance that the region expects us to grow is about 160 or so. So this plan is key to meeting that obligation. On the housing side, if we adopt this plan as well as a number of others that are proposed to date, the city will have capacity for about 143,000 housing units. Again, that's just a shade more than the 138,000 household growth that the region expects us to grow. On the job side, and this is an important factor that Steve was talking about, jobs, and this is really key to the success of the regional plan in meeting our greenhouse gas obligations, jobs really need to be near regional transit. For one, the proximity of workplaces to jobs has been shown over and over again is the most critical thing to get people to take transit to work, and how people get to work is a key driver in how we perform as a region in terms of not just congestion but environmental performance. Secondly, the job market is really regional. People take jobs all over the region. There's substantial intra-city, intra-county commuting, even if each city individually would have the job housing balance. There's huge commuting between cities. And then lastly, putting jobs near transit is important for people who don't have cars and lower income to be able to access those jobs. Cutting off access to jobs in transit areas and having them out in the periphery makes it really hard for people, particularly who don't have cars, to access those economic opportunities. And San Francisco is the transit royalty of the Bay Area, even compared to places like downtown Oakland. Our VMT performance, our transit performance is double what even our nearest competitor is. And so the modeling has shown that if San Francisco doesn't accommodate its share of the jobs in the core of the city, there's a little chance that we will meet our regional greenhouse gas obligations. And then lastly, the places that we have in the region and in the city to accommodate jobs are very limited based on our transit network primarily. In San Francisco specifically, we've long had the policy directive, and I believe it is the right one, that we don't sprawl jobs all over the city, that most of the city is residential and support for those neighborhoods, and we concentrate our jobs in downtown and the immediately adjacent areas, which also happen to be where our regional transit is located. And the regional transit plans in Plan Bay Area and so forth aren't really going to change that picture, whether it's Central Subway opening, Caltrain electrification and the downtown rail extension, and hopefully someday a new Transbay transit crossing by the time we get to 2040. Those are all going to still continue to reinforce kind of the downtown Soma, Mission Bay areas as the most regionally transit accessible locations. And so this is just a 3D representation of those 2D maps you just saw, just showing how jobs and housing growth could be accommodated citywide. This is the job side. And you can see how that lays out. And then the housing side is much more distributed. We have our housing growth is accommodated much more broadly across the city, probably appropriately so given how our regional and local transit network is distributed. And so just to close out on the jobs housing front, again, it's not an individual plan is not a self-contained ecosystem, an individual neighborhood. It's even questionable whether the city as a whole is a self-contained ecosystem. It's really a broader commute shed and regional framework about how we need to make sure that all of our workers can be housed It's critical for jobs to be near those transit accessible locations. And then lastly, there are very few places in the city and the region where it makes sense to concentrate jobs, and they're precious few. And so we need to make sure that we don't inadvertently put those off limits and force jobs to go into more suburban locations where we all agree is not a great place for them to go. And so with that, we'll close it up. I'm sure there's lots of questions and discussion. We're happy to entertain them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you. So before we go into more comments, I know that the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development is here as well. Sorry, I'm pulling up my notes. And I'm not sure if you had any comments as well. Sorry.
Supervisor Kim, I think OEWD had also mentioned, or I have in my notes that it might be here. I don't know if they are or not. But
Sorry, I have too many pieces of paper in front of me.
But if they want to comment as well.
Amy Chan from the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, and my colleague Claudine Rosario is here as well. We're happy to take any questions. Our office is very excited about the plan and excited to have additional resources to help us reach 33% affordable housing in the plan area. I can talk a little bit more about the projects that Steve has said are already have active applications. But
Amy, I'm sorry, Ms. Chan, could we start with the MTA Central Subway site? And
Yes.
Is that project fully funded?
The project, I believe so. I would have to go back and check with our office. We did release the RFP recently for the project back in August, and we should have applications due early next year. I can go and make sure that we are clear about the full funding of the project.
Yes, I only ask because regardless of any development occurring in the Central Soma Plan, the 80 units of affordable housing projected for the Central Subway site at Moscone would be able to move forward without any kind of development happening in the Central Soma area plan.
Right, noted.
No, that was the question.
Oh, whether or not that we are going forward with the...
No, not whether we're going forward. I know the RFP has been released already.
Right.
I'm asking, is this project 100% funded regardless of any development happening in the Central Soma plan, so any impact fees being generated from the plan?
I am not certain, but I will take that question back to our office, and I'll make sure that we'll get you a response.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Supervisor Sarah Dennis Phillips with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. We're mostly here to support and answer questions. Obviously, from the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, we're happy to speak about the benefits of jobs, not just what Josh spoke to, but also the local benefits, the things it pays for, affordable housing, transit, et cetera. And I think the fundamental truth that we've learned over the last couple of years is that very much like housing, when we limit jobs, we limit access to those jobs to only the highest paying jobs. And so if we want to keep a middle income base and a broader base of jobs that is not exclusively tech, we want to make sure we're balancing both housing and jobs. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Sorry, I did find all my notes now about who is coming to present here today. So in terms of one of the questions that has come up from the community, and planning may not have the answers to this today, but I think something of interest is, of the 33% affordable housing, do we have a projection on the breakout based on area median income of the 2,500 that are projected to be built?
Sure. Steve Wertheim, Planning Department staff. I can give that a whirl. So if we expect about 740 on-site units, so that would be subject to Section 415. We don't know exactly the breakdown between rental and condo, but assuming it's 50-50, then rental would be relatively low. AMIs and condos a little bit higher. And then we have about 1,800 units that would be either through off-site or mostly through the in-lieu fee that goes to the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. They can speak to their specific program, but my understanding those are very deeply affordable. Typically, those projects are deeply affordable.
And so, I mean, it would be good to get a firmer sense of what we think what we project to be the AMI levels. And how did you come up with the breakdown that 50% of the residential units would be rental and 50% home ownership? Is that just kind of a safe, do we just say 50-50 to have an even split, or is that based on our conversations with developers in the Central Soma plan?
Both, and also the historical record of development in Soma. We feel like it's actually a higher percentage of the buildings that are going to be typical in Central Soma, 85 feet and higher. Typically, the percentage is higher for condo, and condos will actually yield higher affordability outcomes than rental. So I was trying to be conservative in our estimates by saying it's 50-50. If more of the buildings are condo, then we'll actually wind up with a higher affordability percentage. I just want to make sure no matter what, we got to 33%. And if we get 35%, 37%, great.
Over my past 7 years on the board, most of the developments that I see at least proposed are for rentals. It is, of course, because they all do the subdivision maps, they can always convert to home ownership later, but I've primarily seen rentals being built, even in the district that I represent. But when you look at developments over, did you say 85 feet? What you see is an increase in home ownership condos. So that's where the percentage breakout came from. Okay. I think, one of the questions that has come up a lot, and I know that I've brought this up in several of my meetings, is the state density bonus program and whether we've studied its potential impact. And what you have projected is if the developments that are currently saying that they'll do on-site affordable housing development participate in the state density bonus, we're looking at 1,000 new market rate units within the Central Soma plan that will have an obligation under a new enclosure housing ordinance to pay the in lieu fee. But that's what we're projecting right now. And how does this impact the planned infrastructure for the plan? I know that's not part of today's hearing. But when we look at open space and other community serving facilities, I assume it's based on the lower number of housing units that would be built.
Based on the low, so right, we get about $2.1 billion from the lower number. If there's another 1,000 units, at about $100 a square foot per unit, 1,000 square feet per unit, we get another maybe $100 million of funding for those resources.
And I'm sorry I'm switching around so much, but kind of sticking to the housing portion. One of the issues that has come up in some of our community meetings is a question about unit mix within the Central Soma plan. And so being that Central Soma plan overlaps with a bit of our youth and family SUD that was part of our Western Soma plan as well. Is there any thinking about any baseline requirements on 2 and 3 bedroom unit mixes within certain parts of Central Soma to address families serving residential buildings?
Absolutely. The entire area is within the eastern neighborhoods and thus subject to the existing requirements, 40% 2-bedroom or 30% 3-bedroom, and I believe there's a new option for 35% if there's some new option where some combination thereof, but there is that mix that's already required of these areas.
40% 2-bedroom or
30% 3-bedroom.
30% 3-bedroom?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one or the other. And not a mix of the two, where, for example,
you
like
could do
20%
the mix.
2-bedroom, 10% 3-bedroom.
Yeah, there's been a recent addition to the code that I haven't internalized, but there is a third option that is some mix of the two. You could always do a mix of the two. There was just a codified version of it.
Has there been any conversation about having a higher floor for portions of the plan that overlap with the youth and family SUD?
The youth and family SUD historically had a higher percentage on some of the units that were internal to the block, but we are not changing the zoning in that portion of the plan area, right? We're not changing the height limits or changing the capacity to do housing in that area. We're very specifically targeting other parts of the plan area to increase the development potential, but focusing the benefits, the public benefits in that part of the area in the youth and family zone. So that was a very strategic move on our part. So we're not changing any of the rules around what's required in there. We're certainly open to other strategies. I feel like most of the units that have a higher affordability percentage in that area, they're very small lots anyway. I'm not sure if they qualify for our baseline because they're the lots in the middle of those blocks.
Okay. That is some of my questions for now. I want to open up for colleagues and then to open to public comment so that members of the public could go ahead and speak on the plan now, and I will have some questions after that.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Kim. Colleagues, any questions at this point before public comment? Okay, I have a few speaker cards here, and then everyone else, please feel free to come on up. Everyone will have 2 minutes. Mike Rizzo, John Nicolini, Charlie Chang, John Gomez, Jean Boyce, excuse me if I messed that up, Nora Hurley, and Gina Cariaga. Anybody else, please line up against the far wall. You'll have everyone have 2 minutes to speak. First person, come on up.
Hi, good afternoon, supervisors. Mike Grisso here with Kilroy Realty Corporation. We're a property owner in the Central Soma Plan area. Excited to be developing the San Francisco Flower Mart project. I filled out a speaker card not quite knowing what I was going to say because at the Planning Commission I found myself objecting to many elements of the plan that were proposed, but listening to the presentation today I actually found myself agreeing with a lot of the points that were made. And on specifically the jobs housing balance issue, I think what we would like to emphasize is that it is a regional issue. Having a lot of experience in the planning field myself, I think that we have to be careful not to go the way of building a sort of a bedroom community out of San Francisco. Other cities have made this mistake. Vancouver is a classic example. It's a beautiful city. They've had tons of development over the last 20 years, but they've lost their office space, and San Francisco doesn't want, we shouldn't let that happen in San Francisco. We're certainly building lots of housing, and as I think you heard in the presentation, we should continue to do that, but there should be some neighborhoods that are set aside for jobs, and I think where there's a good transit connection, especially a huge investment like the Central Subway, it's appropriate to do that. And I also would emphasize, as you'll probably hear from some of my partners who are here from the San Francisco Flower Mart, we're trying to do a lot of things in the Central Soma Plan area. Development, of course, is a big part of it. We're trying to preserve PDR uses. That's an important thing. And sometimes housing and certain industrial uses don't mix too well. So again, in general, we're very supportive of the plan. I won't go into my comments that I made at the Planning Commission about some of the elements that we still have strong concerns about, but on the jobs housing issue, I think the plan's going in the right direction. We need to preserve some parts of San Francisco for jobs, especially these PDR neighborhoods. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
All right, thank you for hearing us. I'm John Nicolini. I'm owner of Delano Nursery at the San Francisco Flower Mart. There's a little background. My grandfather started our company in 1922 on Delano Avenue here in San Francisco. So we're approaching 100 years in business here. We're very excited about the development coming up in the future here with the new state-of-the-art of the Flower Mart. And if you know, people don't really know how, if you haven't visited the Flower Mart, we're operating at night when everybody's sleeping. It's very, very busy down there. 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. So I think really the best use is development is the design that's being proposed now for office buildings, which wouldn't interfere with people living, if they were living up above us in the Flower Mart. It might cause a little bit of a problem. So I would think as you guys consider the development of the South of Market area and the Flower Mart and that particular parcel, the office building set up there, and all the jobs that we're providing in the Flower Mart would be probably a perfect setup for that. And I hope you consider that in your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Charlie Chang. I've been a business owner at the San Francisco Flower Mart for the last 7 years. Well, it's family owned, so we've been involved for over 30 years. And just like any other family business, I've been working it since early age, since I could. I remember toiling in the greenhouses, 100 degrees every day, rain or shine, whatever. But I've also seen the industry change in the last 30 years. I've seen a lot of our growers, our association members, dwindle because we couldn't keep up with the times. And I see this opportunity, the Soma District Plan, as an opportunity to reinvigorate our business and to continue our business and hopefully get some of these growers back online with us and helping the business grow and not just have this area as just a tech only, but also as a agricultural centered type of business as well. I see a huge opportunity for us and I think it's a really great step in moving forward for the city.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is John Gomez, and I am the owner and I'm a present tenant at the San Francisco Flower Market. I am an immigrant from Colombia, and 26 years ago, I decided to go into the flower business as my second career. I wanted to make you aware of the present conditions of the San Francisco Flower Market. We work under an uncontrolled system. We have no heaters, we have no air conditioning, so we sell our flowers as though we were out on the sidewalk at 2 o'clock in the morning. We need a new flower market. We have to continue to ask you guys to please approve this project, because the flower market is a beautiful, beautiful business, but it's a hard business. And if you can help us build a new flower market, it will be so much better for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Gina Cariaga. I'm representing the Central Soma neighbors, and I'm also the president of the SF Blue Homeowners Association. We've submitted a quite lengthy comment letter to the planning department already that details a lot of our concerns about the high-rise plan in our residential neighborhood. This is an area near Folsom and Harrison between 2nd and 3rd Streets. And I'd just like to let you know that we are particularly in favor of the mid-rise alternative that the planning department supported as recently as 2013. The mid-rise alternative would cap heights at 130 feet, that's 12 stories, and it would allow for 90% of the development envisioned now in the high-rise plan supported by the staff. The high-rise plan would allow buildings to go as high as 350 feet, cast shadows over our community, create wind tunnels. Basically, it would extend the financial district into our residential neighborhood. The mixed-use alternative would allow almost all of the growth, the residential development and office development, but keep the neighborhood livable on a human scale with access to light, air, and open sky. I brought for you copies of the first 47 pages of our letter. I'd be glad to make the exhibits available to you through email. We just want you to know that we think that the DEIR is inaccurate right now, and would like to see a revised and recirculated EIR, and we think that with revision, the mid-rise alternative might look really attractive to the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Nora Hurley, and I'm a resident at 631 Folsom Street, or SF Blue. I also support the 2013 mid-rise alternative to the current high-rise and higher density alternative we're talking about today, and I support the letter that has been submitted on our behalf by our attorney, Richard Drury. I think the mid-rise alternative is much better suited to the already existing residential neighborhood in Eastern Soma. There's been talk about how this is a sort of no man's land as far as the residential community goes, but we do have a strong residential community, and we've been there for many, many years. I think that the higher rise permissions and the greater density will increase the negative impact we're already seeing from too much traffic. You know, we have all the ramp access in our immediate vicinity to the Eastern and Southern Bay neighborhoods. We have AT&T Park, we have Moscone Center, we have continued street closures due to existing construction projects, and we know that there will be more to come in the years ahead due to new projects. And we also have the Chase Center, which will be opening up by 2019, and all the traffic that will bring through our neighborhood. So we would much prefer to continue to cap as much traffic moving through our neighborhood as we possibly can, and the mid-rise alternative answers that question. We ask the committee to take into consideration the environmental and quality of life issues that negatively impact the day-to-day lives of longtime Eastern Soma residents who invested in the neighborhood when there was little there, when banks wouldn't even extend a mortgage to people moving into these newer buildings buildings. And we helped create this vibrant, desirable neighborhood, and we hope you hear our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Christy Wong. I'm with SPUR. I'm our Community Planning Policy Director. I just wanted to share our overall support for the plan. This is an important place to accommodate growth in our region because of the regional transit and the existing job center that it is. The plan has really addresses comprehensively public benefits for the neighborhood, improving quality of life for existing and future residents and workers. Also wanted to celebrate the plan incorporating sustainability throughout. It's good for the environment and good for the people who spend time in this area. I did want to focus on the fact that this is the right place for jobs for the reasons I mentioned above, because many jobs want to be near other jobs because of its adjacency to the financial district. And people make their decisions to take transit if they're more likely to choose to take transit if their job is close to transit than if their home is. But 80% of the job growth over, say, the last 5 or 10 years has happened in suburban locations, and San Francisco has done the bulk of what has been near regional rail transit. And those are things that will make quality of life better for everyone in the region. However, we're also an advocate for increasing housing production across the city. And we would say that if there's a way to incorporate more housing units within the plan without sending the EIR back to the drawing board, we are very much in favor of that. So we are very much champions of the plan. We would, we do have a few concerns about the implementability of the plan, both through financial feasibility of fees and because of Prop M and its possible limits on the build out of the plan. But we encourage you to move the plan forward as soon as possible and consider those barriers to implementation so that we see the benefits as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Todd David on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. So first I want to thank the supervisors for having this jobs housing conversation. It's one that we are really focused on at the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition, and it's one that I've had with Mr. Wertheim on numerous occasions about this plan. We have concluded after many conversations with lots of people that it is also very valuable to have density in jobs in certain areas. And we also firmly agree that the jobs housing balance is mainly a regional question that needs to be answered. Where I might get a little more nuanced is saying that just saying that it's a regional problem or a regional answer and not actually talking about how we're going to solve it regionally is a concern. So, I think that we need to actively be thinking about how we are building housing or trying to build housing, near BART land, not just in San Francisco, but throughout the whole system so that people have the ability to take transit to these types of locations where there's a high density of jobs. So I would love to see the conversation move forward, not just that it is a regional issue, but how we're actually going to get to solving that regional issue. Finally, I've also had conversations with Mr. Wertheim that it is my understanding that there's a couple of really great sites on this in this plan that are currently 30,000 square feet that can be increased to 40,000 square feet that we could add housing to without sending back to the EIR, without starting over. So I do think that we need to be opportunistic where we can and to increase the housing in those sites. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. David, before you go, could you actually tell us what those parcels are?
330 Townsend?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Corner of 4th. No, it's okay. Yeah, corner of 4th. Good?
Hi, everyone. My name is Brooke Ray Rivera. I'm the executive director of Build Public. We're a nonprofit that empowers neighborhoods to create and sustain great public spaces. I'm here because we're partnering with the planning department, the rec park department, and also developer Tishman Speyer on a new 1-acre public open space between 4th, 5th, Brandon, and Bryant. And I'd like to voice my support for the Central Soma Plan overall. As you know, land use and transportation are also inextricably linked to good public spaces. So the Central Soma Plan is important not just because of the important density that it adds to our growing city, but also because it recognizes the importance of commensurately increasing the amount and quality of public open spaces along with that density. We need more public plazas, parks, playgrounds, and streetscape improvements, safe shared spaces where San Franciscans and visitors can connect, relax, play, and celebrate. The plan clearly identifies locations and opportunities for converting underutilized public land and streets into vibrant new public spaces. It is critical that projects like these be realized, given the community's expressed need for more and better public gathering spaces in Central Soma Plan area specifically. I'd like to commend the Planning Department for their hard work and vision on all aspects of this plan, and I urge the Land Use and Transportation Committee to move this effort forward as soon as possible as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. John Elberling, Todco Group. When everything started 7 years ago, as Director Ram said, the priority of the department and himself has been to accommodate growth, commercial and housing. And from that very beginning, 7 years ago, the response of our community organizations, including Todco, has been equal priority to that. Equal has to be community building, neighborhood building, community preservation. But the problem is, although we, of course, get many platitudes and a lot of verbal support in the presentation, for example, what we actually get in real measures in the plan are half measures for the community preservation, for the community building. And the perfect example of this is the housing program you just heard today. When the city first committed to achieving a 33% affordable goal in Central Soma, it was not the reduced size area. It was not. It was the whole study area. The right number to start with is, of course, the EIR's number. That is the legal authoritative growth projection that you will rely on when you vote to approve this plan someday next year. Now, I expect that chart to be updated. I expect the numbers to fluctuate some, but the department does not get to massage the number down on a lot of assumptions. They have to solve the 33% problem for the growth that the EIR projects in housing in the Central Soma study area that we all began with 7 years ago. And last but not least, that 33% is not the only part of Prop K. Everybody seems to forget that Prop K 2014 called for 50% affordable housing in San Francisco. The 33 is the low mod piece, and that's what the department is trying to solve for now. But the other 17 is middle income. And there's nothing in this department plan to get that 17% anywhere in Central Soma. It's time that we start doing that now. Bring it back when the EIR numbers are updated with the new plan.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Fernando Martí with the Council of Community Housing Organizations. I want to, first of all, commend the Planning Department for bringing together, I think, a very important linkage in their discussion between density, both of jobs and housing, and the public benefits that accrue from that increased density. I would contradict the Director Ram in saying that this plan meets the Prop K requirement for 33%. As John Elberling just explained, it does not. Nor does it meet the Prop X requirement of no net loss of PDR in cultural spaces unless it guarantees the affordability of those PDR and cultural spaces. You all before you will be looking at this through the lens of the EIR, as John mentioned. That EIR predicts that in this plan area, we will be creating 60,000 new jobs. 60,000 new jobs. And if we use Josh Switsky's household per worker ratio of 1.3, that's the need for 50,000 new units of housing. And if we understand that of those 50,000 new units of housing, it's not just the new jobs that we've created, but a lot of low and moderate income jobs, right? Remember, for every one of those tech jobs, we're creating jobs for all those baristas and restaurant workers and hotel workers that are going to be part of this. The real need created by this plan is for 25,000 units of affordable housing. What the plan has is it says it's going to create 14,000 new houses, new units, at least 33% of that, at least 5,000 of that should be affordable units. Maybe they're not in the Central Soma area, but somewhere in south of Market, we need to locate those units. And that means we need to locate sites because those units are not going to be made through inclusionary housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Supervisors, Joseph Smook with the South of Market Community Action Network. Just a couple of points. One is that most of the affordable housing, at least as presented, was built into the inclusionary number. As far as SOMCAN's concerned, we prefer a strategy of aggressively buying development sites in order to build 100% affordable housing. The inclusionary units tend to be a little bit too expensive for the people that we see in South of Market who come for our services. So how do we fund purchasing sites that are cheaper, of course, today than they will be at any time in the future, and also enable us to meet the rollout goals of being able to have affordable housing as the plan gets implemented? One is to relook at the jobs housing linkage fees, which seem to be pretty low. Tech has changed the way that we use office space, and the jobs housing linkage fees that we have currently in the city don't reflect the new utilization of jobs per square footage in office space. So if we really relook at that, I'm sure it's not going to close the entire gap, but that would go a long way towards raising more money than is currently projected. Another point that I want to make is just around the youth and family zone, the special use district that was created when Eastern Neighborhoods was implemented in 2008, or when it was passed in 2008. We would like to see more specific figures in terms of higher levels of inclusionary in the special use district and in terms of larger bedroom size units in the special use district. These were promises that were made at that time that have never been followed up on. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hello, Supervisors. David Wu with the South of Market Community Action Network. Under the plan, the timeline for the construction of new affordable housing units is unsure and unpredictable. As stated in the Strategy for New Housing memo, over the course of the 25-year plan, quote, given the unpredictability of market conditions, it is not possible to predict when these construction clusters will occur. Further, locations for new affordable housing sites have only been identified for 57% of the new affordable housing units, meaning that it is unknown where the remaining 43% of sites will be if the units are ever produced, creating another layer of uncertainty. The memo states that many of the new affordable housing units will likely be funded through in-lieu fees. According to the Central Soma plan itself, quote, in-lieu fees would accrue as development occurs. The development of these affordable units could fall behind the market rate development that provided the fees or land in some instances by several years. This further highlights the way in which the new affordable housing production under the Central Soma plan is unsure and unpredictable. There needs to be a concrete timeline for the development of all affordable housing in the plan. Additionally, the type of affordable housing units that are often built can be unaffordable to working class residents, such as BMR units. Another issue is the memo also states that it is possible that the majority of new affordable housing will likely be ownership rather than rental. This is a major issue as the majority of households in the South of Market are renters. This type of new affordable housing as proposed does not match the reality of residents' need in the South of Market and must be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Angelica Cabande with SOMCAN. First off, we would like to thank our supervisor for her ongoing commitment to our community and neighborhood. I would also like to thank Steve Ornheim for reaching out to SOMCAN to meet with us to talk through our concerns and ways to address it in the plan. We look forward to meeting him. First off, though there are 8 goals of Central Soma, we really see the priority is on building more office space. We need to instead have a balance of these goals, particularly in the housing. We also saw in the plan that there is no policies in place to protect existing rent-controlled units and SROs. Yes, SRO units are not ideal housing, but it is homes to a lot of people in the South of Market, and we can't ignore that. We want to see policies in place that is detailed on what mechanism will protect us and sustain these existing units. And I just want to make it clear that when we say existing, we want to make sure that doesn't get counted under the 33% of the department still trying to figure out how to get to that number. We want to make sure there is protection for these units and working on the actual numbers for the 33% affordable housing that we would like to see a range of from 30 to 90%. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Paul Barrera. I'm with Soma Pilipinas. Central Soma Plan does not create any new policies aimed at stopping eviction and displacement pressures, as the plan rezones the area to increase height limits, therefore conferring more profit potential. Eviction and displacement pressures increase. There must be new controls put in place to prevent evictions and displacement of existing residents in the South of Market that could occur due to the Central Soma Plan. Displacement has had a marked impact on the Filipino community south of Market, with 2,500 individuals down from 5,000 in the previous census. Soma Pilipinas is the new state-certified Filipino Cultural Heritage District, and the city has been tremendously supportive of our cultural preservation efforts. Indeed, our community has thrived in and around the Soma for more than 100 years, a powerful legacy that Soma Pilipinas is dedicated to honoring. However, without greater assurances from the Central Soma Plan around affordable housing, we fear that displacement will continue to impact the Soma Pilipinas community, ousting the very people whose culture Soma Pilipinas has been recognized by the state of California as dedicated to preserving. If Goal 7 of the Central Soma Plan is to preserve the neighborhood's cultural heritage, part of that starts with ensuring that Filipino community can remain and grow in the Soma Pilipinas Cultural Heritage District. It cannot be considered a Filipino Cultural Heritage District if no Filipino people live there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Rachel Lastimosa. I'm with Soma Pilipinas. I am with Soma Pilipinas and also a former resident of Soma from the early 2000s and a working artist in the Soma district. I want to talk about the need for stricter legislation that benefits our neighborhoods with the new zoning. 1 in 4 children in Soma are homeless. There are stories of families at Bessie Carmichael Elementary School where families are actually living in cars with the wide range of 30% to 90% plus AMI in Soma. This reflects the growing disparity of rich and poor. And although there is economic growth in Soma, there's groups on the lower end of that AMI that are making the same, if not less, than that 30%. So what we really need in our communities is less offices and more affordable housing to reflect the community, the families, the artists, the workers in our community that we serve, and to support the high concentration of the historically underserved Filipino population in Soma, as well as a concrete timeline for implementations of these plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Tony Robles. I am with Senior and Disability Action, SDA. Our concern is around displacement and eviction. The Central Soma Plan does not create new policies aimed at stopping eviction and displacement pressures as a result of the plan. As the plan rezones the area to increase height limits, therefore conferring more profit potential, pressures on eviction and displacement increase as speculation takes place. Our concern is that there must be new controls put into place to prevent evictions and displacement of existing residents in the south of Market that could occur due to the new plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Teresa Flandrick of Senior and Disability Action. Again, the same thing that Tony just said in terms of making sure that we are taking care of the people and the culture that are already there and somehow trying to figure out a way to not allow gentrification and the destruction of all that has been built up there over many, many years. That's a hard job, but we need to learn from what has happened in the Mission District, in what's happening in North Beach, and that all of the workers down at the wharf in the service industry, which we know the service industry is what is going to grow the most in the future. And so do we have places that are affordable for these workers? This is not going to go away. The number of people in these jobs are going to continue to grow, and we need to make sure we are taking care of them and not having a reverse commute, as has happened in the Mission, in North Beach, where 45% of the workers at the wharf are now traveling from the East Bay back here, having once lived within a 7-minute walk or a 5-minute bus ride from their jobs. So I just hope we can learn from what has already happened and try to preserve all that is good and all that is taking care of both the lower income level as well as the middle income. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to comment on item number 4? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. Wanted to follow up with a couple of questions, some of which came up during public comment and some of which I had prior. Wanted to start, I think, with the issue that I think will just be a continuing discussion, as I know it has been at Planning Commission, but certainly at this board as the Central Soma plan comes forward, but also several other large development proposals, such as Pier 70 and COL Lot 337 and India Basin, which is really this discussion around the jobs housing balance. And Mr. Swiskey, I really want to appreciate your comment about what you said, that plans are not these contained ecosystems, and neither even are cities. But I think the reality is that while we hope and expect that the rest of the 9 counties will build, based on what we've seen in the past, it doesn't look like that's happening. And while I know that we have a huge jobs accommodation, and I hear it, by the way, from our private sector community, that they want to see more office built in San Francisco and that they're having trouble finding rentable space for their companies, it's also very clear that we have a huge housing crisis. And so whether the Central Soma plan whether this is the correct balance or not, I think it's just going to be a point that I'm going to continue to engage the planning department in and push you on. I'm not saying that I know what the answer is, but I certainly think that the point that was made by Mr. Marti earlier about 63,600 jobs being created through the Central Soma plan, as stated by the EIR, thereby creating roughly, 55,000 new households, and only building 7,000 units of housing. It's just troubling. And I know that there's an expectation that other regions will build more housing than office, and certainly the rest of San Francisco that cannot build office will build more housing. But it's just, I think a lot of that is based on hope, good hope, but, obviously nothing that we can actually ensure. And, Treasure Island and Park Merced are 2 of the major developments that we hope will build as entitled, and really there's nothing more we can do except they're entitled now, and we got to make sure that they get built. But there's no guarantee that all of this housing will get built, and so there's a big question about where will all these people with these jobs live if people don't build as we hope that they will. I'm not sure I have a really good question for you, Mr. Swiskey. I just, I think that's going to be a point that's going to continue to come up. And what I hope to see as we continue to move forward with the Central Soma plan is to have some more options around more housing. I guess that would be the point that I would make is what flexibility do we have within the what we have studied through the EIR, where we can look at building more housing in the Central Soma plan. But I think in particular, my concern is with folks that have very few options, and those would be folks in the working class, low income, and middle class housing market. How can we ensure that we are building enough working class and middle class housing both through the Central Soma Plan and even just outside of the Central Soma Plan, to ensure that those who are the service workers, the baristas, the hotel workers have a place to live as we create those jobs. One of the questions that I had, and I know this is part of the memo, is that there is approximately about 1,080 units just within the 33%, if we assume, the 33% is of the 7,000 so units built within the currently demarcated Central Soma Plan that have not had sites identified. And so it says in the memo that they could be contained in approximately 11 different sites, and that one or more of these could be publicly owned sites in the South Market. And I was hoping you could go into some more details about what these 11 sites are, or where these 11 sites are.
Steve Wertheim, Planning Department staff. I may need some OCD backup on this, but the point of this memo is that we found, before the plan's even been adopted, we found location for about 60% of the affordable units we'll need over the lifetime of the plan. And the point is that at this point, we don't know where these other sites are, admittedly. Now, I feel like the 60% is a huge leap in improvement from previous plans that have occurred. We've been really diligent from the get-go, working with the community, working with the developers to identify sites. There's a 25-year plan, and so the presumption is that as funding comes in, we would be able to identify sites into the future. So they're basically circling that there's a demand for 11 sites in the next 25 years in Soma.
I see. So when you say could be contained in approximately 11 sites, you weren't saying that you've identified those 11 sites. It just means that it could be contained within 11 sites, assuming about 100 units per site, which is actually a very large affordable housing site. We don't build very many 100% affordable housing developments that quite hit that 100 unit mark. Even the one that we've committed to building is 80 to 85 units, and so it does seem somewhat ambitious. You also mentioned that it could include one or more publicly owned sites in the South Market. Has at least those been identified? And it can be Ms. Chan or to Mr. Wertheim.
I can try. We were just thinking, for example, there's very early discussion about the Moscone Garage site, for example,
Got it.
as something that could provide a substantial amount of affordable units into the future.
I don't believe that there are other locally publicly owned sites that have been identified, but 1068 Mission is a good example of a federal surplus site that we've recently negotiated with the Department of Human Services to acquire, and that will be 250 units of affordable supportive housing in 2 buildings, one for senior households and one for family households. So I think there are some examples of potentially going at 100 units, which is a good economy of scale for us for development. And I think if we do have the funds that are restricted to identifying acquisition of sites in Soma, we will be very focused on finding sites both for new construction of 100% affordable housing, and I think to speak to some of the comments around preservation, we can obviously also use the funds to preserve housing through our small sites program, which serves the 5 to 25 units of rent-controlled housing that are at risk. So I think we would be very diligent about making sure that we are focused on identifying sites to both build more affordable housing and to preserve existing affordable housing.
Has that work begun yet? The identification of sites either for new construction or acquisition?
For preservation, yes, and my colleague Claudine is here who helps staff the Soma CAC, and I think the CAC has been looking at sites for preservation. And then for new construction, I think as Steve has mentioned, there have been the 57% of units identified are through the sites that have been named in the memo.
Yes.
But we do have to identify what the remaining 40% of sites would be to cover to get to that 33% goal.
I'm a little concerned that we haven't identified, at least even theoretically, where these 1,080 units could be constructed or preserved, because we are developing and constructing at a very rapid rate in San Francisco, particularly in this district, the district that I represent. So I'm just not sure how much developable parcels will remain if we don't identify those sites before we approve the Central Soma plan. And one of the concerns that I've heard from the community, and I think they are valid concerns, is that we move forward and we approve the Central Soma plan and we have these aspirational goals, and that we even collect the fees through the developers to build affordable housing, but then we don't have the land to build these 1,080 units that we're promising to the neighborhood and community.
I think that is a really valid point, and I think our office and planning can definitely work together to make sure that as we're coming back to the committee and coming back to the Planning Commission, that we're looking at other potential sites to help meet that sort of the gap to get to the 33%.
You know, there's two conversations that we're having right now. One is just hitting the 33% of new units that we've demarcated within this new Central Soma area plan. And then the other is, I think, a thread that we're hearing from the community is that they'd like to see a 33% guarantee on all the new housing that will be built in the Central Soma plan that was studied under the EIR, right? So two very different numbers. But if we can't even fulfill the construction of the 33% of the units, just that, you know, the planning department considers part of the Central Soma plan, then I am a little concerned, you know, about where this affordable housing will get built. So we'll have the funding, but we won't have the land or the sites to build on. And so my hope is that during this time, we can work to identify more of these sites so that we have some assurity that this affordable housing will get built. And not just kind of hope that it will happen. Because based on what we're seeing right now, I mean, developers are going to be gobbling up land in the south of Market. So it's going to be very difficult, I think, to find, you know, 11 sites that could fit 100 units of housing each. I mean, those are, you know, big parcels. And so I just hope that we can have a, you know, a more concrete discussion on that next time. And by the way, I think the conversation about preservation is incredibly important, and maybe that can be, you know, explored further as the plan moves forward. Is can we identify some sites for preservation to ensure that current renters that live near and around this plan are protected into the future as well, and whether we can also look at some larger sites over 25 as well, just to get kind of a good bang for our buck.
Yeah, and on that last point, we have been in conversation with housing advocates in the room and looking at how we can reach preservation of sites that are larger than 25 units and also SROs.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. One of the other pieces, I know that today is not the hearing on infrastructure, but at the next hearing when we do discuss infrastructure, a concern that has come up just observing the Eastern Neighborhood Plan is on the delivery of infrastructure with construction of housing and office and other commercial use. I think there are concerns that, you know, there are at least two areas of the Eastern Neighborhood Plan that has largely been entitled or built out in construction, and very little of the infrastructure that was promised has been delivered along with that construction. So are there triggers that we can put place within the Central Soma Plan that would ensure that infrastructure and affordable housing is being built at least at close to the same rate that the market rate commercial and housing is being built as well? The second piece that has come up is it's great that Central Soma Plan is going to meet Prop X requirements of one-for-one PDR replacement, but how do we ensure affordability of this PDR? I know that's a much more difficult question to answer, but I think as we talk about preserving artists and manufacturers in the Central Soma Plan, it's not enough to just dedicate the land to them. We have to make sure that that land is, the rentable space is affordable to the artists and manufacturers and producers that we'd like to keep in the South Market and keep the area plan diverse. So those are some of the comments that I will make today. Again, we have at least 2 more hearings on the Central Soma Plan before we go back to the Planning Commission. But I thought it was important that the board give their input earlier in the process so that when it's coming for approval before the board, we're not asking those questions then. Colleagues, I see Supervisor Peskin on the roster.
Supervisor?
Thank you, Chair Farrell and Supervisor Kim, for your questions. And I agree that the goals are all laudatory. goals, albeit they are aspirational, and the monies where they're to go all make sense. I mean, $2 billion in public benefits, but I always wonder whether or not we get to the bottom buckets, and whether, as a city, we should be having conversations about whether we want to have less buckets and maybe more affordable housing, which I always worry might get short shrift in the out years of the plan. I had a question. I don't know if it's for Mr. Wertheim or Mr. Switsky or for Mo, but have we done an assessment of all the city-owned properties or other public agency-owned properties within the boundaries of the Central Soma plan area?
Within Central Soma, there are very few publicly owned properties. There's obviously the freeway rights of way. There's South Park. There is Bessie Carmichael School at 4th and Harrison. There's a fire station on Bloxham and 4th. And then there's the PUC yard, which we are working towards building both a park and affordable housing on that site. So we've moved forward with that opportunity for something that is possibly not the highest and best use of that site, but the other sites are probably used for their best functionality at this time.
So the laydown yard on 5th and Bryant is what you're referring to?
Yes, 639 Bryant Street.
And that's the one that, as currently proposed, would be traded for the 8 acres at 2000 Marin, and then Tishman would end up with that property, and they would have an affordable housing site on that block, is that what you just said?
And the public park, yes, sir.
Okay, got it. I guess one thing that I think may be missing from the plan philosophy or the goals, and this goes to my earlier comments, and I think maybe consistent with some of the comments that Supervisor Kim made, which is, it seems to me that while accommodating a substantial amount of jobs and housing is goal number one, it seems like that should be qualified by accommodating a substantial amount of jobs and housing in such a way that doesn't exacerbate the current city housing crisis and affordability crisis. And so I understand what you guys are saying, which is, hey, this is a regional problem. But the reality is there's nothing in this plan or in any decision that this board or this mayor is going to make that would have the city of Brisbane do the right thing with the Baylands. So those things are out of our control. What is within our control are the things that are happening within the boundaries of the city. And as you noted, these are priority development areas. Plan Bay Area actually shows the 3 major cities in the region as the place that's going to accommodate all of this growth. So you would think that, I mean, whether we can control a regional housing strategy or not, that we don't want to exacerbate the housing jobs imbalance that currently exists within any new plan area. So it seems like, and maybe I'm missing something, that goal number one should be that we accommodate the, and we could do this cumulatively. I mean, we could look at Pier 70 and the 1.75 million square feet of office there, and we can look at what we've got planned in Western Soma and Central Soma and downtown. But it seems to me that one of our fundamental goals should be that we're at least not exacerbating the housing crisis, so that within each plan area or all the plan areas cumulatively, that we're saying we are going to at least accommodate the jobs, the housing that these jobs are creating, right? I mean, I agree. I don't want San Francisco to become more of a bedroom community to the peninsula than it already has become. You know, note the Google buses and what have you. But if we're going to reverse that trend, we can't make it worse within the boundaries of our 50, square miles. Anyway, maybe I'm. Yeah, if you want, Mr. Switsky, take a shot at that.
Supervisor, I think that was the point of presenting the entire city map. I think that's exactly what you're getting at, which is looking at the totality of everything once you all add it up to make sure as we do each plan, we're keeping a running tally and looking at the entire city so that we don't go out too far in any one direction without keeping track of the totality of it. And so we certainly welcome discussion about whether that totality is the right mix. But that's the point of bringing that all together, so that when you consider not just these plans and these actions that are before you, but everything that's that's on the books and that has come before you in recent years and that will come before you, that you consider it all in the context of each other.
All right, to be continued. I mean, again, if one of the fundamental, what's not working is affordability, which is one of the things in your plan philosophy, address what's not working, and that's affordable rents. I don't see how this tackles that. I mean, at 33% of 7,600 units, I just don't see how this makes a big dent in affordability within the plan area or citywide or regionally. But my comments for what they are worth.
Supervisor Kim?
No, thank you very much, and thank you, Supervisor Peskin, for your comments. Again, as he had mentioned, to be continued. We will have this back at the Land Use Committee when there's room on the agenda. I know that Chair Farrell has quite a few items to hear at Land Use Committee, but I do look forward to the next hearing on the Central Soma Plan, and thank you for all of your work on that. Thank you, Chair Farrell.
Okay, with that, Supervisor, should we continue this item to the call of the chair? Okay. Supervisor Peskin, motion to continue this item to the call of the chair. Motion by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, do we have any other business in front of us?
There's no further business.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.